When I opened my eyes, I was back at the moment I handed in my resignation letter. Without hesitation, I tore the thin piece of paper into shreds. Principal, I've made up my mind. I'm willing to go teach in the remote mountain areas. I'll leave in half a month. Emma Carter, have you lost your mind? Ethan Walker's voice was filled with suppressed anger. I'm going to the mining site for work, to provide a better life for you and our son. What's the point of you following me there? Our son is still so young. My parents' health isn't great either. Someone needs to stay and take care of them. Can't you think things through? At your age, why are you still acting so irrationally? His cold, piercing eyes locked onto mine, snapping me out of my daze. My fingers trembled, clutching the resignation letter, already soaked with tears. I lowered my head and looked at the blurred ink through misty eyes. A sharp pain pricked at my heart, as if countless tiny needles were piercing through it. In my past life, I had ignored Ethan's objections, resigned from my job, and insisted on following him to the mining site. With no one left to take care of my in-laws and our son, we had no choice but to bring them along. The conditions at the mine were unimaginably harsh, but I gritted my teeth and endured it all. I took care of Ethan's parents, staying by their side until their final days. But even on their deathbeds, they still clung to my hand and earnestly pleaded with me. Emma, we know you're unwilling to accept this, but what else can we do? Ethan has sacrificed so much for this family his entire life. Now that our son is grown, please, let him go. I stood stiffly by the hospital bed, biting my lip, refusing to say a word. The words of protest were right on the tip of my tongue, but when I looked at their frail, sunken faces, I couldn't bring myself to say them. I wanted to ask, why? Why, after everything I had done for this family, was I still seen as the obstacle in Ethan's pursuit of happiness? Seeing me hesitate to agree to the divorce, my son, Ryan Walker, the very child I had poured my heart into raising, lost his patience. He stormed over, grabbed me by the collar, and dragged me out of the room, shoving me onto the cold hospital corridor floor. Mom, look at yourself, he sneered, his expression cold and distant. Do you really think you're worthy of Dad? He's been stuck with you all these years. Can't you think about him for once? Let him go. If you agree to the divorce today, I'll still see you as my mother in the future. But if you refuse, don't blame me for cutting ties with you. When you're old and dying, you'll have no one left to bury you. I tilted my head up, desperately trying to see his face clearly. This was my son, the child I had raised with all my love and devotion. And yet now, he looked at me with nothing but indifference. Hatred surged in my chest, boiling over. The metallic taste of blood rose in my throat. I couldn't hold it back. I coughed up a mouthful of blood. But he was so heartless, he didn't even spare me a glance. I struggled to get up, stumbling toward the hospital room. I wanted to ask them, what did I do wrong? But before I could step inside, Ryan slammed the door shut in my face. Even as I desperately reached out to stop it, he showed no hesitation. The heavy door crushed my fingers, sending searing pain through my body. It felt like my very soul was being torn apart. That night, I sat on the cold hallway floor, my heart drowning in despair. I refused to accept this. For this family, I had willingly given up my dignified career. I had worked tirelessly, sacrificing decades of my life. And in the end, they all told me I wasn't good enough for Ethan Walker. They all forced me to let go. They wanted me to step aside so that he and Olivia Brooks could be together. But why? Why was I the one who had to let go? Where was Olivia? That night, when I returned home in a daze, Ethan was sitting at the dining table, smiling as he picked food onto Olivia's plate. They looked so comfortable, so perfectly matched. I trembled with rage, my body shaking uncontrollably. With a heart full of hatred, I flipped over the dining table. Then, I grabbed the divorce papers he had prepared for me and tore them to shreds, throwing the pieces in his face. Ethan Walker, you stole decades of my life, and now you want to run off with her? My voice was filled with fury. You want a divorce? Fine. Over my dead body. Ethan immediately stepped forward, shielding Olivia in his arms. His expression was ice cold as he watched me lose control. Once I was done venting, he didn't even bother arguing with me. He simply held Olivia and walked away. His posture was still as straight as ever. Olivia was still as elegant and radiant as before. Only I, after years of hardship, was left with a hunched back and strands of gray in my hair, and when their figures finally disappeared from sight, I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Over and over, I told myself, I must never let go so easily. Even if I had to die, I would drag them down with me. I never expected my words to become a prophecy. Half a month later, I died beneath a collapsed mine. And the one who sealed my fate was none other than the husband I had devoted my entire life to loving. To save Olivia Brooks, Ethan Walker chose to saw off my legs. In my final moments, I watched in despair as he carried Olivia in his arms and ran for safety. My heart was filled with nothing but regret. Why had I wasted my short life on someone like him? Now, staring at my still intact legs, I couldn't help but laugh. How wonderful, my legs were still here. My life had just begun. I still had time to change everything. Ethan frowned, his expression dark with displeasure. Emma, did you even listen to a word I just said? I smiled at him and, without hesitation, tore up the resignation letter in my hands and threw the pieces into the burning stove. I heard you loud and clear. I'm not going with you. Ethan stood frozen in place, staring at me in disbelief. After a long moment, he finally regained his composure, the corners of his lips curling into a mocking smirk. Oh, so now you're playing hard to get? Don't think I don't see through your little tricks. A few days from now, you'll be crying and making a scene to force me to agree. He scoffed. Whatever. If you want to come, I won't stop you. I'm heading to the station to pick up Olivia. Make sure dinner's ready when I get back. And don't forget to buy some pork. Olivia loves pork stew with vermicelli. That's right. I remembered now. Today was the day Olivia Brooks had specifically traveled here to reunite with Ethan. In my past life, I had foolishly believed Ethan's words when he told me it was just an old classmate he hadn't seen in years. When she arrived, I went out of my way to welcome her warmly. Not wanting to delay Ethan's transfer process, I had even stood in line for hours to buy them 2 sleeper train tickets while I, trying to save money, had only bought myself a standing ticket. I spent 2 whole days standing on the train, holding our child and caring for his parents, while he and Olivia comfortably rested in their seats. I watched coldly as Ethan adjusted his collar in front of the mirror, smoothing it out carefully before wetting his fingers to neaten his hair. His eyes glowed with barely concealed excitement. As he turned to leave, I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. He looked at me, puzzled, as I stretched out my palm. The money for the pork? His face immediately darkened. But I didn't care in the slightest. We had been married for 6 years. Our son was already 4. And yet, not once had he ever given me a single penny for household expenses. Back then, I never asked him for money, thinking that since I had my own salary, it wasn't necessary. It wasn't until we moved to the mining site that I realized, the entire time, for 6 whole years, every cent he earned had been sent to Olivia Brooks. I still vividly remembered the day I discovered the truth. I cried and demanded an explanation. Annoyed by my questions, he dismissed me with a single sentence. Emma, I never realized you were such a petty, narrow-minded woman. I trembled, struggling to find words to refute him, but before I could speak, he shoved me aside and walked out the door without looking back, leaving me sobbing alone. He knew how hard I had worked all those years. My salary had never been high, barely enough to feed a family of 5. Our son needed tuition, his parents needed medicine and doctor visits. When the money wasn't enough, I picked up extra work washing clothes for others after my teaching hours. In the dead of winter, my fingers were covered in painful, bleeding chilblains, throbbing every time they brushed against the icy water. He saw it all. And yet, without hesitation, he had sent every last penny to another woman. So what did my sacrifices mean? But now, I saw everything clearly. To this family, I had never been anything more than a servant. I wouldn't be foolish anymore. I wouldn't give without expecting anything in return. Seeing that I had no intention of stepping aside, Ethan's expression flickered, shifting between irritation and unease. He remained silent for a long moment. He gritted his teeth and said, "Then forget the pork. Just make something simple." Without another word, he avoided looking at me and hurried out the door. I curled my lips into a slight smirk, watching his figure disappear. Ignoring my son's cries and my in-laws' anxious calls, I turned around and calmly walked out the door. I ran all the way to the principal's office, barely catching my breath before blurting out, "Principal, I've made up my mind. I'm willing to go teach in the mountain areas." He looked at me in shock, not bothering to hide his surprise. "Are you sure? Just a few days ago, you told me you were resigning to follow Ethan to the mines." I met his gaze with unwavering determination. "I'm sure. I should be giving back to society, helping the country nurture more talented individuals, not wasting my knowledge doing physical labor in a mining site. I'm not afraid of hardship or exhaustion, but I refuse to let my education go to waste." The principal's eyes were filled with admiration, though he still seemed a bit hesitant. "Remember, think it over carefully. You're the best candidate for this program, but your son is still so young. If you leave, you won't be able to return for at least a few years." I smiled and responded with firm conviction. "Don't worry, since I've decided to go, I won't be thinking about coming back. Whether it's 3 or 5 years, or even if I stay there for the rest of my life, I won't regret it. As for my son, I trust that Ethan is a good father. He'll take care of him. And one day, my son will be proud of me." The principal was so moved by my words that his eyes welled up with tears. Without further hesitation, he approved my application. Half an hour later, I walked out of his office, holding my transfer order, completely satisfied. By the time I got home, night had already fallen. Inside, the whole family was gathered around the dinner table. Sitting in the center, surrounded by everyone's attention, was Olivia Brooks, smiling sweetly. The table was filled with dishes, all more fragrant and appetizing than anything I had ever cooked. A bitter feeling rose in my heart. 6 years of marriage, and I had only just learned that Ethan could cook. Even the pork stew with vermicelli looked particularly delicious. I tried to suppress my emotions, but my vision still blurred slightly. So that was it. The reason he told me to just make something simple earlier wasn't because he had no money. He simply didn't want to hand it over to me. All these years of love had been nothing but a wasted effort. The moment I stepped inside, Ethan's smile disappeared, bit by bit. He let out a cold scoff, folding his arms as he leaned to the side, looking at me with disdain. "Oh, so you still remember to come home? Do you even know what time it is? The whole family has been waiting for you to make dinner, but you were nowhere to be seen." I sniffed, forcing back the urge to cry. This time, I didn't immediately apologize like I used to. Instead, I stared at him with an indifferent expression. "I had work at school that needed my attention. Listen carefully, Ethan. I'm not a housewife. I have a job too. Don't expect me to spend my whole life revolving around this family. From now on, I won't be responsible for any of you. Don't come to me for anything." The entire room fell into stunned silence. My in-laws gawked at me in shock. My son, who had been happily stuffing his mouth with food, suddenly stopped chewing. Ethan was so caught off guard that his chopsticks slipped from his fingers, but he seemed completely unaware of it. The only one unfazed was Olivia Brooks. She still had a gentle smile on her face, watching the scene unfold as if she were the true lady of the house. "So you must be Emma," she said, her voice soft and pleasant. "You seemed so capable. Ethan talks about you all the time." She cleared her throat, stood up, and looked down at me. Seeing her again, I still couldn't suppress the storm of emotions within me. This woman had loomed over my entire life, taking everything from me, my home, my family, while pretending to be innocent. In this new life, I still found her face just as loathsome. I didn't bother hiding my disgust. I lifted my hand and shoved her aside. I barely used any force. She let out a sharp scream as he fell to the ground. My in-laws slammed the table in outrage, scolding me for my lack of manners, while my son burst into frightened cries. "Bad mommy? You're so mean." I ignored them all. Without a word, I walked past them, heading toward my room. As I passed Ethan, he grabbed my wrist, his face dark with anger. "Emma Carter, did you leave all your manners to the dogs? Apologize to Olivia right now, or get the hell out of this house." His gaze was icy cold, cutting through me like a blade. I knew he was truly furious this time. But for once, I wasn't afraid. How ridiculous. He was willing to throw his wife out just to defend his precious Olivia. A mocking smile curled at my lips as I met his eyes without a trace of fear. Slowly and clearly I said, "Ethan Walker, I've taken care of this family for 6 whole years. What right do you have to tell me to leave? I will not apologize to anyone. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? To get rid of me so you and Olivia can be together? Fine, I'll grant your wish. I don't want this family anymore. Let's get a divorce. Ethan's face twisted in fury, his voice shaking with disbelief. Emma, what the hell are you saying? I only scolded you a little. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? I didn't bother looking at his infuriating face. I turned and walked straight into my room. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of panic in Ethan's eyes. He staggered forward, as if wanting to follow me, but I ignored him and slammed the door shut with a loud bang. Outside, chaos erupted. Olivia's soft sobbing, my in-laws muttering in anger, my son wailing at the top of his lungs. But inside my room, I felt nothing but peace. I was done with this house, done with this heartless husband, done with the son who had already shown his true nature in my past life. Without hesitation, I carefully folded my transfer papers and tucked them into my chest. Then I turned and began packing my few belongings. For years I had scrimped and saved, making sure the family had new clothes every season while I wore the same few outfits over and over. My clothes were faded from countless washes, the cuffs frayed and thinning, my pants covered in patches. The only things I had in abundance were my books, treasures I had collected before marriage, saving every penny to buy them. As I was nearly finished packing, the door creaked open. Ethan walked in, carrying our son in his arms. He sat on the edge of the bed, his expression flickering with unease. When he finally spoke, there was even a trace of hesitation in his voice. Emma, Olivia is just an old classmate. You're overreacting for no reason. I know you're a little jealous, but there's nothing between us. You don't need to be so hostile toward her. And about today, I won't hold it against you. Just stop making a fuss, and everything will be fine. When I didn't respond, he let out a relieved sigh, as if thinking I had finally calmed down. He then held out our son toward me. Don't talk about divorce so easily. This family needs you. Look at our son. He's so adorable. Can you really bear to leave him? I paused, looking at them with a calm expression. The tear-streaked face of my son overlapped with the cold, heartless expression he had worn in my past life, the one that had filled me with utter despair. I smiled faintly, but didn't reach out to take him. Instead, I said in an indifferent tone, "There's nothing I can't bear. He's your son, after all." Ethan's face turned red with anger. He tightened his grip around our son, making him cry even harder. I remained cold and silent, feeling only exhaustion and disgust. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, unable to hold back his rage, he finally exploded. Emma Carter, don't push your luck. A mother like you doesn't deserve a son like him. I looked at his furious face, completely unmoved. In my past life, I had been too responsible, too self-sacrificing, and that was exactly why I had been trampled on so cruelly. Ethan let out a sharp scoff before storming out, still carrying our son. I didn't care. I simply lowered my head and continued packing. As I slung my bag over my shoulder and stepped out the door, Olivia Brooks stood at the entrance, her eyes glistening with tears. The moment she saw me, a fleeting trace of provocation flashed through her gaze, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. But when she spoke, her voice carried the delicate, pitiful tone of someone playing the victim. Emma, this is all my fault. I didn't know my place and visited without thinking, upsetting you like this. If you really can't stand me, I'll leave right now. But Ethan works so hard, can't you stop making things difficult for him? I couldn't be bothered to respond. I brushed past her and walked straight toward the door. She let out a soft sob, as if about to chase after me, but Ethan grabbed her arm and held her back. Leave her alone. She's just being overly dramatic. You'll see, she'll come crawling back in no time. Then he softened his tone. Olivia, just stay here for now. Make yourself at home. Tomorrow I'll give you some money, buy whatever you need, don't worry about saving for me. Even as he said this, his eyes kept flicking toward me, clearly meant to provoke. I paused for a moment, recalling the indifferent way he had treated me in my past life. The irony of it all almost made me laugh. Just before stepping out, I turned back. Meeting his smug gaze, I spoke calmly. I'll have the divorce papers drawn up and sent to you. Just sign them when they arrive. Ethan's face froze in shock, his entire expression crumbling in an instant. I let out a soft chuckle, then turned and walked away. This time, I didn't look back. I found a small inn to stay in that night. The room wasn't cheap, and the cost stung a little, but I reminded myself that I was on my own now. My expenses would be minimal from now on, and the teaching assignment came with a generous stipend. The money was worth it. Days passed, and Ethan never once came looking for me. I didn't care. If anything, I enjoyed the peace. I continued going to work as usual. When my coworkers learned I was leaving, they were reluctant to see me go and took extra care of me. Some even volunteered to cover a few of my classes. I counted my savings and set aside a small portion for myself. With the rest, I made a trip to the bookstore and bought as many books as I could carry. The mountain schools lacked so much, especially books. If I could do even a little to help those children learn, then it would all be worth it. Time flew by. There was only 1 week left before my departure. That evening after dinner, I strolled back toward the inn at a leisurely pace. As I neared the entrance, I spotted 2 familiar figures waiting in the cold. Ethan Walker stood there, holding our son's hand. The freezing wind had turned both of their faces red, and they kept shifting their weight, stomping their feet to keep warm. My heart sank. So he had finally come after all. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself before walking toward them. Over the past few days, I had sent the divorce papers to Ethan through someone I trusted, but he had refused to sign them. There was no point dragging this out. I had to end things properly. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Despite the freezing temperatures, my son was wearing only a thin cotton jacket. His little face was dirty, and his lips were tinged with purple from the cold. Ethan didn't look much better. The once crisp white dress shirt I had always ironed for him was now wrinkled, with grease stains smudging the collar. I couldn't help it. I let out a small laugh. Hearing me, they both looked up. My son let out a soft whimper before running toward me, wrapping his arms around my leg. Ethan, clearly emotional, stammered, "Emma, you're finally back." Before he could say anything more, our son burst into loud sobs again, his tears and snot smearing all over my pants. I crouched down and held out my arms. He immediately broke into a smile, his little hands releasing my leg as he reached for me. But I didn't pick him up. Instead, I gently pushed him away. He stared at me, stunned, his tears frozen mid-fall. Even his cries seemed to get caught in his throat. I stared at him coldly, the same way he had once looked at me in my past life. Ethan didn't seem to notice my indifference. Instead, he grabbed my hand anxiously. "My dad's heart condition flared up again. He's out of medicine. My mom's asthma is getting worse. Please, come home. Without you, everything's a mess." I calmly pulled my hand away, my expression completely blank. What does that have to do with me? They're your parents, not mine. Besides, isn't Olivia living at our house for free? It's only right for her to help out a little. Ethan's hand froze mid-air, his face shifting between embarrassment and frustration. After a long pause, he finally withdrew his hand and hesitated before speaking again. "Emma, are you still mad about Olivia? Please, believe me, she's just an old classmate. She's a woman. I couldn't just let her stay in a motel. It's not safe for her." I almost laughed at how absurd that sounded. So it wasn't safe for her to stay in a motel, but it was perfectly fine for me? My voice turned even colder as I sneered. "I've been staying in a motel for days, and I don't see you worrying about me. And stop trying to fool me. I already looked into it. Olivia isn't just an old classmate. She's the woman you've always loved but could never have. Back then, she thought you were too poor and married someone else. Now that her husband's dead, you're thinking about getting back with her, aren't you?" Ethan's face turned pale in an instant, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Emma, I swear, I don't have any improper thoughts about Olivia. Just bear with it for a little while. Once we move to the mining town, I promise I'll cut ties with her. We'll live a quiet life as a family, all right?" His voice even carried a rare trace of warmth. If I hadn't lived through my past life, I might have fallen for it again. I might have obediently followed him home, played the perfect wife, and convinced myself to endure. But unfortunately for him, I had already seen everything for what it was. Looking into his expectant eyes, I was tempted to tell him I would be leaving soon. But then I realized, what was the point? As he tentatively reached out to pull me into his arms, I took a step back, my voice devoid of warmth. "Ethan, I'm not going with you to the mines. I know you've never forgotten about Olivia. That's fine, I don't care anymore, I'm setting you free. And in return, I hope you'll show some dignity and sign the divorce papers. It was clear he had never expected me to be this cold. His body swayed slightly, his always composed face crumbling as his eyes turned red. Even as his gaze filled with despair, he stubbornly shook his head. No, I won't agree to a divorce. Olivia and I are innocent, you have no right to slander me. Just as the words left his mouth, a shadow darted from the corner of the street. Olivia rushed toward him, shoving me aside as she threw herself into his arms. Her eyes were brimming with tears, her voice trembling with pitiful sorrow. Ethan, I've regretted marrying someone else every single day. I know I shouldn't come between you and Emma, but she's the one who wants to leave you. She doesn't want you anymore. So why can't we start over? She clutched his shirt, crying breathlessly. That night when you got drunk and held me, you cried so much. I knew then that I still had a place in your heart. And besides, you've already ruined my reputation. If you don't take responsibility, how can I go on living? Hearing this, I frowned. So they couldn't even wait until we were divorced before getting together. I didn't bother hiding my disdain. I let out a cold laugh and looked directly at Ethan. This is what you call innocent? Ethan, if you want to be a man, at least have the guts to own up to your actions. Don't make me look down on you even more. Ethan's face turned even paler. He tried to push Olivia away, but she clung to his neck desperately. Tears streamed down her face, so pitiful that even I almost felt sorry for her. But Ethan, for once, wasn't moved. Instead, he forcibly pried her fingers off him, his expression twisted with disgust. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, he suddenly raised his hand and slapped her across the face. Shut up, he roared. Say one more word of nonsense and I swear I won't let you off. Olivia stumbled back, covering her cheek in shock. Ethan glared at her with unrestrained fury. I let you stay at my house out of kindness, and this whole time, you've been plotting to break up my family? Have you no shame? I had never seen Ethan Walker so utterly unraveled before. His entire body trembled with rage, but the moment he turned to look at me, his expression softened. Emma, I was drunk that night. I don't even know what happened. Don't listen to Olivia. She's just trying to drive a wedge between us. Can't you believe me? His voice was desperate, almost pleading. I swear, as soon as we get home, I'll make Olivia pack her things and leave. Watching him stammer through his explanation, I found it laughable. The man I had once loved, the man I had given my youth to, now, even looking at his face, made me sick. I stood there in silence, watching as he struggled to push Olivia away, while she clung to him like an octopus, wrapping herself around him tighter each time he tried to break free. His panic only deepened as I stared at him without emotion. Then, without a word, I turned and walked into the inn, shutting out everything and everyone behind me. I had no idea when they finally left. By the time I finished washing up and glanced toward the window, the street outside was empty. After Olivia's public meltdown outside the inn that night, rumors spread like wildfire in the small town. My co-workers were furious on my behalf and treated Ethan with nothing but contempt. Whenever they saw him on the street, they would mock him without restraint. Yet, despite the humiliation, he shamelessly came looking for me several times, only to be stopped at the inn's entrance by the staff. His persistence annoyed me to no end. But in the end, before I left, he finally signed the divorce papers. I heard it was because Olivia, unable to bear the rumors, had slit her wrist in front of a crowd. The wound wasn't deep, it had nearly healed by the time she reached the hospital, but Ethan still wept uncontrollably when he got the news. He held her in his arms, comforting her for hours, completely ignoring the judgmental stares around him. When he came to deliver the signed divorce papers, he stood outside for a long time, hesitant to come closer. His face was gaunt, his features worn down by exhaustion. Emma, I'm sorry, he murmured. Olivia isn't like you. If I don't divorce you, she really will die. I accepted the papers without hesitation and nodded. It's fine. I don't mind. He looked at me, stunned, as if unable to believe how indifferent I was. I turned and walked away without another word. And I wasn't lying. I truly didn't care anymore. I was on the verge of stepping into a new, bright future, and nothing he said or did could change that. 2 days later, I boarded the train heading to the mountains. As the train prepared to depart, I wanted to take one last glance at the place I had once called home. But just as I looked out the window, I caught sight of Ethan in the crowd. His eyes were red as he pushed his way toward my carriage, desperation written all over his face. "Emma, why didn't you tell me you were leaving to teach in the mountains? What am I supposed to do? What about our son?" His voice cracked as he called out, "Emma, don't go. I can't let you go." The train slowly began to move, his shouts fading into the noise of the bustling station. Panicked, Ethan tried to chase after it, only to be tripped by someone in the crowd. He fell to the ground, scrambling to get up, his face smeared with dust and desperation. Yet all he could do was watch as the train carried me further and further away. Eventually, he sank to his knees among the sea of people, covering his face as he sobbed. The conditions in the mountains were harsh, but I didn't mind. After all, I had already endured the worst in my past life. Compared to that, this was nothing. The people here were simple and kind. There was no scheming, no betrayal. My only responsibility was to teach my students, and in my free time, I buried myself in books. I had given up my own son, yet here I had gained more love than I had ever known. The children were grateful for my presence and showered me with affection, and I embraced it without hesitation. I ended up staying for 10 years. Somehow, Ethan found out where I was. He sent me letter after letter, every single one begging me to come back. He rambled on and on about how his parents had suffered without my care, how their health had declined, how the doctors said they wouldn't live much longer. He told me our son cried every day, devastated by my absence. As for Olivia, she had been clinging to him, desperate to marry him, but he had firmly rejected her. His letters always ended with the same words. He begged me countless times to give him another chance. He wrote that only after I left did he realize how terribly wrong he had been, that this family couldn't function without me, and most of all, that he couldn't live without me. I never replied. At first, I would at least read his letters with an expressionless face before tearing them to shreds and tossing them away. But as time passed, I didn't even bother opening them. I threw them straight into the fire, watching them burn to ashes. Yet even without a response, Ethan remained relentless. Perhaps he thought that as long as he kept trying, I would eventually soften, unable to let go of him and our son. Too bad for him, I felt nothing. After 10 years, my time teaching in the mountains came to an end, and I was finally preparing to return to the city. But this time, I wasn't returning alone. Alongside me was my new husband. Like me, he was a teacher who had come to the mountains to serve. Over the past 10 years, we had been co-workers, partners, and comrades through hardship. Due to the limitations of our situation, our wedding had been simple, far less grand than the one I once had with Ethan. But he cared for me in ways Ethan never had. With him, I was cherished and protected, and I had long since stopped thinking about Ethan or my past life with him. It was nothing more than dust in the wind, completely insignificant. When the train arrived at the city station, I stepped off, holding my husband's hand. After 10 years, I saw Ethan Walker again. He stood in the crowd, clutching a bouquet of flowers, his face beaming with joy. But the moment he saw me holding another man's hand, the light in his eyes instantly vanished. I didn't avoid him. Instead, I walked through the crowd and stood right in front of him. 10 years had passed, and he had aged considerably. The once proud and upright man was now hunched, his temples streaked with gray. His eyes were dim, his lips trembling uncontrollably. "Emma, you got married?" His voice was hoarse, as if struggling to believe it. I met his gaze without hesitation and nodded. "Yes, this is my husband. What about you? How's Olivia?" His Adam's apple bobbed, his voice uncertain. We're doing well." I let out a soft chuckle, not bothering to expose his lie. I had stayed in touch with old colleagues and friends over the years. I knew exactly what had happened to him. After I left, Olivia had repeatedly threatened suicide when Ethan refused to marry her. At first, he tolerated it, but after a few times, he lost patience. No matter how much she cried, he refused to acknowledge her. But Olivia, desperate to prove her devotion, took things a step further. She threw herself off a building. She didn't die, but she was left permanently paralyzed. The doctor said she would spend the rest of her life with a catheter and would never walk again. The incident caused a huge scandal, and under immense public pressure, Ethan had no choice but to take her in, vowing to care for her for the rest of his life. His dreams of going to the mining town vanished. Even his job was barely saved. He had to kneel outside his workplace for an entire day, begging to keep his position. From then on, his meager salary had to support not only his son and aging parents but also Olivia, who now required constant medical care. He could no longer afford medicine for his parents, nor could he pay for his son's schooling. There was no money to hire a caretaker, so his elderly parents were forced to take care of Olivia themselves. In just a few short years, both of them passed away. Desperate, Ethan tried to leave Olivia in the care of his son, who had already been filled with resentment after I left. One day, when Ethan wasn't home, his son beat Olivia viciously, venting years of frustration. Afterward, he left a note behind and disappeared without a trace. Ethan's family was completely shattered. For 3 days and 3 nights, he locked himself in his house, wailing in despair. But no matter how much he grieved, life had to go on. With no other choice, he took on the responsibility of personally caring for Olivia. After exhausting days of work, he would return home only to be met with more suffering. Over time, his temper worsened. People whispered that he abused Olivia behind closed doors. There were nights when neighbors heard her anguished screams and considered calling the police. Social workers had even intervened a few times, but in the end, it was a situation of mutual destruction, one willing to endure, the other resigned to their fate. Eventually, no one cared enough to interfere. Ethan had been utterly crushed by life. Hearing all this, I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity. He had become nothing more than a stranger to me. Now, seeing him again after so many years, I found that I had nothing more to say. I politely bid Ethan Walker farewell, took my husband's hand, and prepared to leave. Behind me, Ethan clenched his fists, trying his best to suppress his grief. Just as I was about to step out of the station, his voice, thick with tears, called out after me. If I had never brought Olivia home back then, would we have been happy now? I didn't stop walking. Without turning around, I answered lightly, "Life doesn't work that way. If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't have married you in the first place." Behind me, Ethan collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. He never understood that it wasn't Olivia who had cost him his happiness. It was his own indecisive heart. I had only returned to the city to visit old friends. Soon I would leave again, this time to settle down in my husband's city, starting a new chapter of my life. On my last day in town, I received news. Ethan Walker had taken his own life. That day, he had returned home in a daze. Olivia, who hadn't eaten all day, was screaming and cursing at him. He had already been crushed under the weight of his life, and those insults became the final straw. Without a word, he walked into the kitchen, mixed a lethal dose of sleeping pills into the meal he had prepared, and fed every bite to Olivia. Once she had fallen unconscious, he turned on the gas. Then, he sat on the couch, lit one last cigarette, and waited for everything to end. The hospital, upon learning that I had returned, contacted me to identify his body. I refused without hesitation. My husband was puzzled. "Why won't you go see him one last time?" I smiled faintly, my mind flashing back to my past life, when I had lost too much blood and lay on my deathbed, my vision fading. I had pleaded for Ethan to look at me one last time. But all I had gotten in return was his impatient voice. "Emma, stop being so dramatic. You're the one who refused to divorce me, so don't blame me for being heartless. You're dying anyway, just let it go. Even in my next life, I never want to see you again." So I would grant his wish. Not in the next life, nor the one after that. For all eternity, I never wanted to see him again. Love had been my choice, and I had no regrets. But I also deserved a better future. "Claire, there's a mission from the organization," Jacob said slowly, his voice heavy. "I have to carry it out as a single man. We'll have to fake a divorce for a year." As his words echoed in my ears, my heart was unnaturally calm. From the moment I came back to life, I knew better than anyone that this so-called mission was nothing more than a cover for Jacob's sordid affair with Linda. In my previous life, I had cried and begged him not to leave, then foolishly agreed, only to end up leaving with nothing while the children suffered. He, meanwhile, indulged in intimacy with his so-called deputy. That time, I lost completely. This time, I lowered my eyes, let my fingertips brush the fabric on my knees, and the corner of my mouth curved into a cold smile. "All right," I answered evenly. Jacob clearly froze, his brows pulling tight as if he couldn't believe I'd agreed so cleanly. He had expected me to cry and make a scene so he could put on an act of helpless devotion. Too bad I am no longer that woman people can trample at will. "Claire, you really agree?" he asked, his voice low, probing. I stood, patted the dust from my clothes, and said coolly, "It's for the organization. How could I possibly hold you back?" His face flushed and his gaze flickered. If it were truly a mission, he should have been relieved. Instead, he looked guilty, as if I had just seen through his hand. I paused, then let my tone turn sharp. "Since it's a fake divorce, we need to make a few things clear." Jacob's heart clearly skipped. "What things?" I walked to the cabinet, opened a drawer, and took out the property deed that had been there for years. Speaking calmly, I said, "Transfer the house into my name. Hand over the bank card your salary goes into. And during the fake divorce, the kids and I still have to live, so you'll leave $450 each month for living expenses." "What?" His face changed instantly, his voice shooting up. "Claire, you're asking for too much." I arched a brow and let my cold gaze fall on his face. "Too much, Jacob? Do the math. I'm a woman raising 2 children and still have to look after your mother. Do you know what her yearly expenses are? Besides, if you're really taking on some dangerous mission and anything happens, I need security." I left no gaps in what I said, both for the children and for the family, and I boxed him in so he couldn't refuse. His Adam's apple bobbed, the veins at his temple stood out, but my words, sharp and direct, left him speechless. "Claire, don't misunderstand. This really is the organization's arrangement. It's not because—" "I'm not misunderstanding," I replied with a light, airy smile, every word cutting to the bone. "If you're on a mission, then taking your deputy Linda along would be perfectly normal, right?" He stiffened, panic flashing in his eyes. In that instant, I clearly saw him guiltily look away. I sneered inwardly. In my last life, I was kept in the dark and led in circles. This time, I'll make sure their little scheme backfires on them. The room sank into heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock in the corner. After a long while, Jacob ground his teeth and said, "$450 is too much. Can it be less?" "Then forget it," I said, feigning indifference. "If it isn't a fake divorce, that's fine too. Just go carry out the mission with your deputy." One sentence drove him to the edge. Sure enough, his face turned iron blue, the veins on the back of his hands stood out, and he went rigid where he stood. If he refused, he couldn't openly be with Linda. If he agreed, he would have to pay a steep price. I stared at Jacob, and the more uncomfortable he looked, the more secretly pleased I felt. In the end, he clenched his teeth and spat out, "Fine, we'll do it your way." The corner of my lips lifted slightly. "That's more like it." The next day, I personally carried the divorce agreement in my hands. On it, written clearly in black and white, were the terms. The house transferred to me, the salary card handed over to me, and $450 a month in living expenses. In my heart, I swore that in this lifetime I would live with clarity. I would never again be that foolish woman who was so easily cast aside with nothing left in her hands. As the sun set completely and the night slowly enveloped the military compound, the laughter of children outside was still lively, but inside me there was only calm and unshakable determination. I knew that from this day on, my life was going to change completely. The next morning, the air in the compound felt especially heavy. The branches of the sycamore trees swayed in the courtyard. Carrying the bundle I had long prepared and clutching the property deed tightly to my chest, I walked toward the door. Jacob stood there, his face dark as iron, looking like a general forced into a dead end, but still trying to maintain a front of authority. Without a word, we made our way to the Civil Affairs Bureau. In the 1970s, the office was old and bare. The gray-white walls were mottled with patches, and behind the counter sat a middle-aged clerk with reading glasses. She looked up at us, sighed, and said, "Comrades, are you sure you want to divorce? Isn't there any way to resolve your conflict?" I smiled and handed over the application. "We've thought it through. Please just follow the procedure." Jacob's Adam's apple bobbed. His eyes flickered, but he had no choice except to nod stiffly. The clerk lowered her head to read the property division terms, her expression gradually turning odd. House to the wife, salary card to the wife, $450 in living expenses each month. She raised her eyes, staring at Jacob in disbelief. Comrade, are you sure? This is clearly against your interests. I fixed my gaze on Jacob. His face was flushed red, the veins at his temple throbbing. I knew he was cursing me inwardly for asking too much, but he couldn't take it back. If he refused, then this fake divorce would lose its meaning, and he wouldn't be able to live openly with Linda. I'm sure, he said through gritted teeth, forcing the words out between clenched jaws. The clerk glanced at me, a trace of sympathy flashing in her eyes. She shook her head, then swiftly stamped and signed the documents. Half an hour later, the thin divorce certificate was handed to me. Its red cover and heavy characters pressed against my palm, but what rose in my chest was a wave of unprecedented relief. In my previous life, when I held this certificate, I had cried until my tears wouldn't stop. This time, I smiled with serenity. As I stepped out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, the sunlight spilled over my face so bright that I narrowed my eyes. The taste of freedom was this simple and this direct. Afterward, we went to the bank. The hall bustled with people coming and going, and behind the wooden counters were clerks in blue uniforms. I handed over the property deed and the agreement. I'd like to transfer ownership. The clerk checked the documents, then turned to confirm with Jacob. Comrade Jacob, you're transferring the house to Comrade Claire's name? Jacob lowered his head, his voice almost squeezed out. Yes. The clerk let out an "oh," giving him another long look, as though silently marveling that such a fine property was being handed over so easily. The people waiting in line nearby began whispering. Jacob's ears burned crimson, his lips pressed tight, his face dark, his body rigid. At that moment, it was as if the humiliation cut deeper than bullets on a battlefield. I allowed myself a faint smile, slipped the signed documents into my bag, then went to the counter to collect the $450 he had transferred to me for living expenses. A thick stack of bills sat solidly in the palm of my hand. The weight of the money in my hand felt more real than any vow ever could. A trace of bitterness swept through me. In my previous life, Jacob had never given me even $50 for pocket money. I had struggled alone with the children, barely holding things together. But this time, I struck first, forcing him to pay the price for his greed. Walking out of the bank, my steps felt lighter than ever. The sun hung high, the street bustling with life, yet in my ears the world was strangely quiet. Claire, you'd better use that money carefully. Jacob finally broke his silence, his tone carrying a thinly veiled threat. A year will pass quickly. When the time comes, we'll have to remarry. I stopped, turned to look at him, my gaze calm. Whether we remarry or not will depend on whether I'm willing. His face instantly froze, his eyes so dark they seemed ready to spill poison. But this time, I felt no guilt, no fear. That evening I returned to the military compound, packed my simple belongings into the car, and felt the neighbors' curious or pitying eyes on me. Some whispered, "So the daughter-in-law of the Jacobs family really is moving out?" I pretended not to hear, simply picked up my 2-year-old daughter while my 6-year-old son clung to my clothes, his eyes full of unease. "Mom, don't leave me. I can take care of you and my sister too." I crouched down, stroked his head and spoke firmly. "Why would Mom ever leave you? We're going together to a new place, a home that belongs only to us." Under the darkening sky, the car slowly rolled out of the compound. I didn't look back. That place, which had once tormented me day and night, would never trap me again. I had already rented a small courtyard house in the provincial capital. Its walls were made of dark gray bricks, and in the yard grew a few pomegranate trees. Though simple, it was quiet and steady. The landlady, Auntie Lou, warmly helped me move in, fussing as she carried things. "Oh, Claire, it's not easy for a woman like you to raise kids on your own. If you need anything, just come to me." I smiled and nodded, warmth spreading in my chest. That night, the 2 children leaned against me and drifted off to sleep. I lit the kerosene lamp, spread out paper and pen, and began writing down my plans. In this lifetime, I would carve my own path with my own hands. I had the house, I had living expenses, and my children were by my side. I was no longer the woman anyone could control. Looking at the faint glow of the lamp, I swore silently to myself. This was a new beginning. The courtyard sat in a secluded alley in the provincial capital, with gray tiles and blue bricks. At the gate hung an old-fashioned kerosene lamp that cast a pale yellow glow. As I pushed open the weathered wooden door, a rare sense of peace welled up in me. It was modest, yes, but it was truly my own. The landlady, Auntie Lou, was in her early 50s, with a round face and the lines of hard work etched into the corners of her eyes. She came up eagerly to help carry my bags inside. "Oh my, Claire, it's really not easy for a young woman to live out here with 2 children. You must be careful." She sighed as she helped me lay out bedding. I smiled faintly, keeping my tone casual. "My husband's busy with work. It's fine, I can raise the kids myself." Auntie Lou's eyes flickered, as though she wanted to ask more, but in the end she only shook her head. "You have to stay strong, dear. If anything comes up, just come find me." I nodded without explaining further. A woman's intuition is sharp. I could see the doubt in her eyes. Where was my husband? What about my in-laws? Why was a young woman like me moving out alone with 2 children? But I refused to let anyone laugh at me or pity me. After settling in, I wrote a letter to my parents, and a few days later they rushed over from the countryside carrying some food from home. The moment my mother saw me, tears rolled down her face. "My daughter, raising 2 kids on your own must be so hard." I held her hand, smiled, and shook my head. "Mom, I'm fine. This time I chose this path for myself." My father stood silently for a while before finally speaking. "Since you've come this far, don't look back. Your mother and I will take turns coming to help you with the children." His words struck straight into my heart, making my chest tighten and my eyes brim with tears. In my past life, when I was at my loneliest and most desperate, I hadn't dared ask them for help. I thought I could survive by clinging to my so-called marriage, but it ended in complete ruin. In this life, since they were willing to reach out their hands, I had to hold on tight. The courtyard wasn't big, 2 rooms and a small yard, just enough for me and the children to live in. During the day, I busied myself with unpacking, while the children ran around in the yard, their laughter filling the air. In the evening, Auntie Lou brought over a steaming bowl of corn porridge, saying it was a housewarming gift. She sat at the doorway and couldn't help asking, "Claire, your husband really doesn't come back often? Why do I only see you carrying the weight of 2 kids alone?" I smiled and took the porridge from her hands. "He's away on business trips for long stretches. Men always have to focus on their careers." Auntie Lou sighed. "Ah, men these days. They just assume as long as someone is holding down the home, everything will be fine." She glanced at the children and patted my shoulder. "At least you've got backbone. Don't be afraid. The neighbors here are simple and kind. No one will bully you." A quiet relief spread through me. At least in this little courtyard, I could shield myself for a while from the eyes of the outside world. When night fell, I coaxed the children to sleep. My son, Henry, spoke sensibly. "Mom, I'll take care of my little sister. Don't get too tired." His words made my heart jolt. A 6-year-old child should be carefree, yet he was already learning to act far beyond his years. In my previous life, I had watched him harden and grow prematurely mature under hardship. The memory made a dull ache bloom inside me. My daughter Lily was still small, babbling from beneath the blankets, her soft baby voice calling, "Mummy," making my nose sting as tears nearly spilled over. I gently patted them until their breathing evened out, and only the flickering glow of the kerosene lamp swayed on the walls, casting my shadow unsteadily. When they were sound asleep, I took out the divorce certificate and stared at the thin piece of paper. The red cover and cold, sharp words were like a blade severing me from the past. In my previous life, from this moment onward, my life had crumbled, abandoned, humiliated, left utterly alone until I was drained of everything. But in this life, holding the certificate tightly, an unshakable resolve rose within me. This time would be different. I whispered silently in my heart, running my fingers over the soft hair of my children. No matter how hard it became, I would turn things around, for myself and even more for these 2 children. The streets of the provincial capital were still lively. Morning dew had yet to dry, yet the cries of vendors already rose one after another. Holding Henry's hand, carrying Lily on my back, I carefully calculated a matter that could change our fate. In my past life, after the college entrance exams were reinstated in 1980, I had watched others seize the opportunity and step into new lives, while I was trapped in the cage of marriage, struggling even to pay for my children's tuition. That powerless feeling of being abandoned by the times had burned itself into me forever. This time, I would never let the chance slip away again. I decided that before the college entrance exams were officially reinstated, the first step was to open a small English training class. With the memories I had brought back from rebirth, I knew English would soon become an essential skill for studying and finding a job. As long as I acted earlier than others, I could seize the advantage. I went to the administrative building of the Normal University. The old building's paint was peeling, and the hallways smelled of chalk dust. Knocking on an office door, I found an elderly professor with a head of white hair looking up at me. He was Professor Wong from the English department. "Hello, Professor Wong," I said respectfully. "My name is Claire. I'd like to rent a classroom here to open an English training class." Professor Wong squinted at me, his eyes filled with doubt. Who studies English now? Even in the university, hardly anyone chooses this major. My heart tightened, but I didn't back down. My memories of the last life were vivid. I knew that in just 1 year, this language would become the key to countless people's futures. "Please trust me, Professor," I said with a faint smile. And then I suddenly switched to fluent English, introducing myself and quoting a few lines from Shakespeare. My pronunciation was precise, my grammar flawless, and even my intonation carried full confidence. Professor Wong froze, his pen nearly slipping from his hand. Where did you learn that?" he asked, half rising from his chair. "Self-taught," I replied calmly. His brows shot up, and for a moment he was speechless. His doubtful look shifted to surprise, then to admiration, until finally he nodded. "All right, you may rent a classroom in the evenings. The rent is $50 a month." 50. My heart sank, but I nodded quickly. "I'll pay 3 months up front." That amount was nearly half of my living expenses, but I knew it was a worthy investment. Leaving the university, I went to a printing factory. The workers, dressed in blue overalls stained with ink, kept shaking their heads. 500 flyers will cost 30. "You sure about that?" I gritted my teeth. "I'm sure." $30 was a gamble I had already calculated. If I could recruit my first group of students, I would make it back. Back at the courtyard house, I worked day and night to prepare teaching materials. Under the dim light, I wrote down the most practical sentences, copying out the key points I remembered from textbooks in my previous life. Henry leaned against the desk, watching me write, his eyes wide with seriousness. "Mom, is this what you're going to teach other people?" I stroked his head and nodded with a smile. Finally, the opening day of the class arrived. That evening, I went to the classroom early. The blackboard gleamed after being wiped, and the desks and chairs were neatly arranged. My heart pounded hard, but it was full of anticipation. Not many came, only 5 students. Some were university students, some were young workers, and one was an apprentice from a factory. "Teacher, why should we learn English?" One student with glasses asked doubtfully. I smiled, walked to the blackboard, and wrote a large word, "future." Then I turned around and said clearly, "Because this represents the future." I began with the simplest greetings, teaching them as I demonstrated with gestures. To help them remember, I created little stories and even had them stand up and act out short dialogues. At first they were shy and stiff, but soon laughter broke out. The atmosphere gradually grew lively. At the end of class, the student with glasses looked at me with shining eyes. "Miss Claire, so this is how English can be learned? It's so much fun." I smiled faintly, warmth surging through my heart. In my previous life, I had never had the chance to show what I could do. But now, at last, I could rely on my own ability to earn recognition from others. As night fell, I locked the classroom and walked home. The streetlights glowed dim and yellow, the wind sweeping fallen leaves across the road. The tuition money I held wasn't much, but it gave me more peace than any fortune ever could. Because it wasn't charity, it wasn't dependence. It was something I had earned through my own effort. I lifted my head to the starry sky and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." A small training class might just be the first step toward turning my life around. With autumn's chill in the air, I carefully tucked away the tuition from my first students, hiding it in the cabinet. At night, I often looked at my 2 sleeping children, and a long-lost sense of security would rise inside me. But peaceful days never last long. A few days later, I received a letter from my mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhao. She asked me to return to the compound. The handwriting was hurried and messy, as though she had written in haste. My heart tightened. I guessed she must have already sensed something. That evening, I took Henry and Lily back to the military compound. The high walls, once the shackles of my marriage, now felt different. Stepping inside again, my steps were far lighter than before. When my mother-in-law saw me, her eyes immediately reddened. She pulled me into the house, clutching my hands tightly. "Claire, tell me honestly, does Jacob have someone else outside?" Her words pierced straight into my heart like a sharp blade. My chest shook, but I forced myself to calm down, schooling my expression before whispering, "Mom, you're overthinking. He's just out on a mission. Don't let your mind run wild." But she fixed her eyes on me, sharp and sorrowful, the gaze of a mother who had lived through much. "Don't try to fool me. I've been around. Just the other night, I saw with my own eyes Linda sneaking into Jacob's room. Do you think I was imagining it?" My fingers trembled, almost dropping the teacup. In my previous life, she had never mentioned this. I hadn't learned the full truth until the very end. But now, she was saying it to me herself. "Mom, are you sure you saw it clearly? Could it have been a mistake?" I tried to cover it up. She gave a cold laugh. "Claire, you're too honest. If a man were truly clean, would there even be gossip to spread? I'm not afraid of losing face. What I fear is you waiting foolishly, only to end up with nothing." Her voice choked, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. A sour ache filled my chest, but at the same time, warmth spread through me. At least in this life, she wasn't blindly defending her son. She was truly thinking of me. That night, Henry held his little sister and played with blocks inside, while I sat in the courtyard with my mother-in-law under the moonlight. The silver glow spilled across the ground as she suddenly sighed. "Claire, you're still young. There's no need to tie yourself to one tree. If things really go wrong, don't waste your life as Jacob's widow while he still breathes." Her words struck me deeply. In my previous life, though she hadn't treated me poorly, she had never spoken like this. Back then, I had clung to the so-called bond of marriage, dragging myself forward until I was covered in wounds. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Mom, Jacob said it's just a temporary mission. When it's over, he'll come back." "Come back for what? To keep lying to you?" she snapped, her tone edged with rare fury. "If he had any conscience at all, would he really leave you to raise the children alone?" Her words made my heart tremble. I lowered my head, but my mother-in-law reached out and took my hand gently. "Claire," she said softly, "I know you say you don't mind, but inside you must feel terribly wronged. Don't be afraid. No matter what you choose, I'll stand by your side." In that moment, tears nearly spilled from my eyes. In my past life, when I had been at my loneliest and most helpless, no one had stood with me. But in this life, her words felt like a steady anchor dropped straight into my heart. "Mom?" My voice caught, and I didn't know how to continue. She patted my hand firmly. "If Jacob really refuses to wake up, then you should find another good man. You're not lacking in anything. Having 2 children is no big deal. Don't throw your whole life away for one doctor." Her words stirred a storm inside me. Find someone else? In my previous life, such an idea would have been unthinkable. Yet now, her clarity and openness gave me a sense of peace. "Mom, you really don't blame me?" I asked tentatively. She shook her head, her gaze firm. "I blame him, not you. The most important thing for a woman is to live well, not to uphold a man's reputation." The lights at the military guest house were always blindingly bright, the crystal chandelier hanging from the center, scattering fractured beams across the hall. Officers and their families came and went in neat attire, their manner upright, the air filled with a heavy, solemn restraint. My mother-in-law clasped my hand and led me inside, even though I wasn't willing. She insisted, saying she wanted me to meet some new connections. I understood her intentions. She didn't want me to waste my life trapped in Jacob's shadow. She hoped I would start seeing my future from a new angle, Claire, this is the man I mentioned to you the other day, Ethan Gu, she whispered in my ear. I lifted my head and saw a young officer walking toward us. He looked to be in his early 30s, his uniform crisp, his features clean and open, his gaze steady and forthright. Unlike Jacob's cold severity, there was no arrogance or condescension in his expression, only warmth and courtesy. Miss Claire, I've heard much about you, Ethan said, extending his hand. His voice wasn't loud, but it was calm and full of strength. I froze for a second before lightly shaking his hand. You're too kind, Comrade Ethan. Around us, curious eyes turned our way. No doubt people were wondering how a divorced woman with 2 children could still draw the attention of a promising young officer. My lashes lowered, a faint pang rising in my chest, but I quickly steadied myself. During the gathering, my mother-in-law found an excuse to slip away, leaving me alone with Ethan in a quiet corner. The tea on the table still steamed as he poured me a cup and slid it across. I heard you've started an English training class in the provincial capital, he said, genuine curiosity in his tone. I smiled and nodded. Yes, but it's only a small venture. At the start, I don't have many students. That's already remarkable, he said earnestly. In times like these, being able to stand on your own ability is rare. His voice carried no trace of disdain, no empty flattery, only respect. A subtle tremor rippled through me. In my past marriage, what I lacked most was exactly this, to be taken seriously, to be regarded as an equal. Truthfully, many people think I'm wasting time. They say a woman should just stay home, I admitted quietly. Ethan looked straight at me, his eyes unwavering. They're wrong. Every person, man or woman, has the right to pursue a better life. His words struck deep, touching the hidden longing buried in the depths of my heart. After that, we talked at length. He asked why I had decided to teach English, and though I didn't reveal the secret of my rebirth, I only smiled and answered. Instinct, I guess. I just feel he's important. Ethan nodded. Instinct is precious. Many times what truly changes a person's fate is the ability to make a decision one step ahead of others. His words made me look up at him. In the shifting light, his expression was steady, without the slightest trace of pretense. Slowly, the guard in my heart began to ease. Without realizing it, much time had passed. The noise of the banquet seemed to fade into the distance, leaving only the calm and genuine conversation between us. When the gathering ended, my mother-in-law came back over. Seeing how deeply engaged we were, her eyes glimmered with satisfaction. She patted my hand. Claire, Ethan is a good young man. His character is unquestionable. You two should spend more time together. I only smiled, offering no reply. As I stepped out of the guest house, the night wind brushed against my face. I pulled my shawl tighter around me, yet inside, I couldn't calm down. Ethan's words echoed in my ears. Every person, man or woman, has the right to pursue a better life. In the long darkness of my past life, I had never heard such words. No one had ever told me sincerely that I had the right to choose, the right to be respected. I suddenly felt the heavy stone that had pressed on my chest for years begin to loosen, just a little. On an autumn afternoon, sunlight streamed through the curtains into the classroom. On the blackboard, I had written several large English words. The children repeated after me, future. Their tender yet bright voices carried a sense of hope. I had just finished writing a sentence when a commotion stirred at the doorway. Several students turned their heads, whispering. I frowned slightly and looked up. My heart tightened. Jacob stood there in his crisp uniform, though his expression was far gloomier than before. Beside him stood Linda, cradling a 3-year-old child in her arms. She kept her head bowed, her fragile demeanor as if a single gust of wind might knock her down. The moment the 3 of them appeared, the classroom atmosphere froze solid. Claire, Jacob's cold voice rang out, cutting through every sound in the room. I set down the chalk and turned, my expression calm. Comrade Jacob, what do you want? His eyes were sharp, as if he wanted to see straight through me. You, a woman with 2 children, move out on your own and open a training class. Where did the money come from? Who's helping you behind the scenes? I gave a faint smile. Is it so wrong to say I earned it through my own ability? His face stiffened, but he refused to back down. Claire, don't forget, we're in a divorce agreement, not a real divorce. If you take things too far, how will we remarry later? At that, Linda spoke softly from his side. Sister-in-law, Jacob only wants what's best for you. Don't go down the wrong path. She looked pitiful, as though I were the one abandoning the family and disgracing myself. Inside, I sneered. In my past life, it was their act, one echoing the other, that had pushed me into a corner. This time, I would never tolerate it again. I walked to the podium, stood tall, and spoke clearly. Jacob, if you came here out of concern for the children's studies, you're welcome. But if you came to interrogate me, then you'd better bring evidence. He let out a cold laugh. Evidence? Can you swear you haven't been involved with another man? My chest gave a sudden jolt, but I quickly steadied myself. Slowly, I pulled a stack of papers from my bag and spread them across the podium. Then perhaps you should look at whose evidence this is first. The handwriting on the pages was plain to see, records of Jacob and Linda booking rooms together out of town. Several stamped copies lay starkly exposed under the sunlight. The classroom fell into absolute silence. Even the children held their breath. Jacob's face turned deathly pale in an instant. Jacob's pupils shrank, his Adam's apple bobbing furiously. Where did you get this? You don't need to know how I got it. I fixed my eyes on him, my voice sharp as a blade. If you were truly innocent, how could these records even exist? I didn't expose them earlier to preserve the last shred of dignity for you. But if you insist on making a scene, don't blame me for tearing everything open. Linda, clutching the child in her arms, turned deathly pale. Her breathing came fast and she could barely keep standing. After a moment of silence, Jacob's hand, which had been half extended, dropped back down. He looked around and found every student's eyes on him, some filled with doubt, some with ridicule, and many with disdain. The color drained from his face. From his throat came a strangled murmur. Claire, you're too cruel. The corner of my lips curved coldly. Cruel? No, I've simply learned how to protect myself. In that instant, I felt a surge of satisfaction like never before. In my past life, I had begged and compromised, only to be humiliated. But in this life, I struck first, leaving them no place to hide. Finally, Linda couldn't hold back her trembling sobs. Jacob? Let's go. She tugged at his sleeve cautiously, as though begging him to retreat. But Jacob didn't even dare lift his head. He turned and slunk away in disgrace. The moment they left, a murmur of whispers erupted through the classroom. A few students couldn't help but whisper, Miss Claire is amazing. So she was the one being wronged all along. I turned back, calmly picked up the chalk, and wrote one word on the blackboard in large letters. Respect. Today's lesson is about this, I said, my voice steady yet carrying a power that echoed in the air. The students fell silent, all eyes on me. In their gazes, I saw admiration and recognition. Early winter winds rustled through the courtyard, shaking a few yellowed leaves off the pomegranate trees. After sweeping the yard clean, I looked up to see Henry holding his textbook, reading aloud in his earnest young voice. Beside him, Lily wobbled as she practiced writing, her chubby little hand gripping a pencil, her face serious. Warmth spread through my chest. In these hard days, as long as I saw them, everything felt worth it. Through the years, I balanced running the training class and caring for my children. By day, I stood at the podium as a teacher. By night, I returned to the courtyard as a mother. There was exhaustion, of course, but every time I saw their sensible, determined little faces, strength flowed back into me. One day, the school held a parent-teacher meeting. I requested leave and went early. The classroom was full of parents murmuring to each other, some casting glances my way, perhaps still remembering that I was divorced and raising 2 children alone. The homeroom teacher stood on the podium, naming students for praise. At the end, she looked toward me. Henry Smith achieved the top score in this exam. His essay was even selected for publication in the school journal. Applause burst out. Henry's cheeks flushed red, but he sat straighter, his back stiff and proud. His eyes searched the crowd until they locked on mine. At that moment, heat rushed to my chest, and tears nearly welled in my eyes. During the break, I heard some parents whispering, "Who would have thought? A child from a single-parent home could still be this outstanding." I caught every word, my heart tightening. I was about to turn and leave when Henry's clear young voice rang out. "The person I'm most proud of is my mom." The room went still. That small figure stood beside the podium, his gaze unwavering. Henry's voice rang out, every word firm and clear, without a trace of hesitation. She works, she earns money, and she takes care of me and my sister all by herself. She's the greatest mom in the world." In that instant, my eyes completely blurred with tears. The looks of curiosity or disdain around me shattered in a heartbeat. I saw a few parents looking embarrassed, while others nodded and murmured their admiration. I walked forward, gently pulled Henry into my arms, and choked out, "Thank you." But my son, with the composure of a little adult, patted my shoulder. "Mom, you don't need to thank me. You deserve it." That night, back at the courtyard, Henry leaned over his desk, continuing his homework, while Lily clung to me, begging for a story. I told her about Little Red Riding Hood, and she laughed until her voice was bubbling with joy, repeating over and over in her babyish tone, "Mommy is the prettiest." Henry then looked up seriously. "When I grow up, I'll make money to take care of Mom and my sister." I froze, my heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. A 6-year-old child should only know how to play, yet he already understood responsibility. Was it me who had forced him to grow up too early? But without this life, how else would he have become so strong? I stroked his head gently, speaking softly. "Mom doesn't want you to take care of me. I want you and your sister to be healthy, happy, and to chase your own futures." Later that night, when all was quiet, I sat alone on the bed and opened the bank book. The balance inside wasn't much, but it was the savings I had scraped together through hard work. I knew this wasn't just for me, it was for the children. Henry turned over in his sleep, whispering faintly, "Mom, I'll protect you." My nose stung, and I reached out to grasp his small hand tightly. "You two are my greatest strength," I answered silently in my heart. Winter passed, spring came, and the reputation of the training class spread. At first, there had only been 5 or 6 students. Now, every seat was filled. Each evening, the classroom overflowed with young people, their notebooks open, their eyes burning with determination, as though they could seize the future itself from every English word I taught. To meet the growing demand, I gritted my teeth and rented a second classroom, even hiring several normal university students to work as teaching assistants. By day, I rushed around making arrangements. By night, I taught until my voice went hoarse, sometimes so exhausted I could barely stand. Yet each time I saw the enrollment list grow longer and longer, every hardship felt worthwhile. The workers at the printing factory were already used to seeing me. I spread flyers across the counter, checking and rechecking the layout and content. Make sure the flyer highlights our high pass rate and small class teaching. The font needs to be bold and eye-catching. The worker shook his head with a smile. "Miss Claire, you've got more drive than most men." I pressed my lips into a smile, hiding the surge of pride inside. In my past life, I had done nothing but bury myself in housework. Never had I imagined that in this life, I would hold up a world of my own. But success invites gossip. As the number of students grew, so did the rumors. How could a divorced woman have such ability? There must be a man backing her. Ugh. Maybe some powerful official has taken a liking to her. Otherwise, where would she get the money to rent classrooms and buy materials? These whispers drifted through every alley and street until they reached my ears. At first, each word stabbed into me. In my past life, I had bowed my head under such talk, living more and more in suffocating humiliation. But in this life, I lifted my head high. I reminded myself, only strength can silence every voice. Soon, the results of the semester exams came out. Nearly every student from my training class had made clear improvements. Some even scored well enough to be admitted to key high schools. Excitedly, the students brought their report cards to me. "Miss Claire, you're amazing. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have even passed this time." The trust and admiration in their eyes carried more power than any defense I could have given. Those rumors collapsed on their own. Once, a few competitors deliberately came to provoke me, hinting in veiled words that I had only gotten this far because some man was backing me. I just smiled and didn't bother with them. Instead, I turned and pulled out the thick stack of student registration forms. "This is my backing." They instantly fell silent, unable to say a word. By summer, enrollment had surpassed 100 students. The teaching assistants were run ragged, and I had no choice but to find someone to help with the finances. That night, I sat alone in the courtyard, spreading out a stack of crisp new bills. I counted them one by one, the rough tips of my fingers brushing against the cold paper, while tears blurred my vision. I couldn't help but whisper, "This isn't anyone's charity. This is what I earned myself." The tears slid down my cheeks, burning hot. The children rushed out from the house. Henry threw himself into my arms, whispering, "Mom, don't cry. You're the best." Lily echoed in her soft baby voice, "Mommy is the prettiest." I hugged them tightly, my chest aching with sorrow and swelling with pride all at once. As word spread, I gradually became known in the provincial capital as a small but respected businesswoman. Neighbors spoke of me with admiration. "That Miss Claire is really capable. A woman with 2 kids, and she still managed to make her training class flourish." Standing at the podium, looking out at the classroom packed with students, I suddenly felt this was fate's gift. In my past life, I had struggled in endless darkness. In this one, I had finally torn open a beam of light for myself. Outside the provincial capital's cinema, the marquee lights glowed, and the posters showed a newly released foreign film. The crowd surged. Couples brushed past me arm in arm. I tightened my coat around me, a trace of nervousness flickering inside. Ethan stood quietly at my side, his tall figure standing out in the throng. He made no unnecessary moves, simply keeping me company. In my past life, I had never been respected like this. Not pressured, not coerced, but patiently accompanied. During the film, as the lights dimmed, he sat beside me, yet I couldn't focus on the screen at all. The dialogue passed unheard, my mind filled only with the ups and downs of these past years. When the film ended, and we walked out, neon lights flickered on across the streets. Night blanketed the provincial capital, and the wind carried a chill. I was about to say goodbye and head home when he suddenly spoke. "Claire, would you walk with me a little?" I froze, then nodded. We strolled down the sycamore-lined street, our shadows stretched long under the lights. We walked side by side in silence, and with every step, my heartbeat quickened. Finally, he stopped and looked at me intently. "Claire, there's something I want to say." I lifted my head to meet his gaze. His eyes were as open and steady as always, without a hint of falsehood. "I know you've been hurt before, and you carry many fears," he said slowly, each word steady and sure. "But I want you to know, I won't let you suffer that pain again. I want to stay by your side, with your children, and give you a truly complete home." I stood frozen, my heart trembling violently. The word marriage exploded in my mind. In my previous life, I had once dreamed of what a proposal might feel like. But all I had gotten was betrayal and humiliation. That bitter memory made me too afraid to easily trust any promise again. "Ethan," my voice quivered. I'm scared. What if I give my heart again, and in the end, I lose everything?" He didn't rush me or push for an answer. Instead, he slowly reached out, gently placing his hand over the back of mine, his touch firm yet tender. "Claire, you don't have to be afraid. I'm not asking for a perfect you. I'm asking for the you who is willing to walk forward with me. You've carried too much on your own in the past. This time, let me be the one to stand beside you." My throat tightened, tears blurring my vision. The night wind brushed past, and cold tears slid down my cheeks. Yet he didn't panic. He calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Under the light, a simple silver ring rested quietly inside, plain yet gleaming softly. "Claire, will you marry me?" My heart fell into chaos. Reason resisted, warning me not to make promises too easily. But another voice inside me shouted that in this life, I had the right to choose happiness. My hands clenched tight, tears spilling uncontrollably. At last, I raised my head, smiling through tears. "Yes." The moment the word left my lips, it felt as though 1,000 pounds of weight had lifted from my shoulders. Excitement flickered in Ethan's eyes. He didn't say much, simply slipped the ring onto my finger with care. Warmth spread from my fingertips straight into my heart. On the way home, I gazed at Lily, asleep in my arms, while Henry gripped my hand tightly. For the first time, my heart felt utterly at ease. The shadows of the past had finally been released. This time, I wasn't clinging to someone out of dependence. I was choosing a man who knew how to respect and protect me. The night sky stretched deep and endless. Stars scattered across it. Quietly, in my heart, I whispered, "This is the beginning of a new life." Early summer brought the chorus of cicadas, and the training class bustled with energy. With more and more students, I no longer needed to run to the printing factory myself. The assistants divided the work, preparing all the textbooks and flyers in advance. For the first time, I felt the joy of being able to breathe a little easier. One day, after finishing class and preparing to head home, I overheard whispers at the street corner. "Did you hear? Jacob got into trouble." "What happened?" "They're investigating him for misconduct. They say his personal life is a mess, with improper relationships with his subordinates. He was about to be promoted, but now it's all over." I paused mid-step, still holding the chalk in my hand, but my palm didn't tremble in the slightest. So Jacob had come to this point after all. In my past life, he too had ended his career in disgrace, but back then I had been so crushed I couldn't even breathe, let alone pay attention. In this life, I watched it all repeat itself, with cold detachment, not a ripple in my heart. A few days later, more news spread. Linda wasn't living quietly in the provincial capital. She squandered money on luxury healthcare and cosmetics, and secretly associated with other men. Before, she had flaunted herself under Jacob's name, but now that his career was ruined, she immediately turned on him, creating chaos. Word had it she made a mess of the household, dumped the child on my mother-in-law, and spent her days crying and demanding divorce. The gossip of neighbors reached my ears like passing wind, stirring nothing inside me anymore. That evening, while I sat with Henry helping him with homework, Ethan pushed the door open, holding a newspaper. He handed it to me, where a small announcement was printed. An officer was dismissed due to misconduct. The name wasn't fully spelled out, but everyone knew who it referred to. Ethan looked at me gently. "Do you want to read it?" I lowered my gaze and said calmly, "No need." In the past, I might have felt heartache, anger, or betrayal. But now, all I felt was peace. Seeing my indifference, Ethan gave a small nod. He didn't say anything more, only reached out to pull my shawl more securely over my shoulders. A few weeks later, word came that Jacob and Linda had completely fallen out, and divorce was inevitable. When the news reached me, I was in the courtyard hanging laundry. Lily chased butterflies under the tree, while Henry sat with a book, reading aloud with great focus. Sunlight spilled over them, making their smiles look bright and pure. My hands paused for a moment, then I simply went on hanging the clothes over the bamboo pole. "Claire, don't you want to know how they ended up?" a neighbor asked cautiously. I shook my head with a faint smile. "Their lives have nothing to do with me anymore." That night, I sat in the courtyard flipping through my ledger. Enrollment had already surpassed 300 students, and preparations for a new classroom were underway. As I calculated expenses and income, I also quietly mapped out plans for the future. Once, all my hopes had been tied to Jacob. But in this life, I had already walked another road on my own. The thought filled my chest with an ease I had never felt before. Past wounds seemed to scatter into the night breeze. A few days later, Henry carefully handed me a drawing. On it was a smiling woman holding hands with 2 children, and beside them stood a tall, upright man. "Mom, this is our family." My nose stung, but I smiled as I pulled him into a hug. Yes, this is our family. The old faces and old stories no longer had any power over me. The nights in the provincial capital had never been so lively. The streets bustled with cars, neon lights flashing bright. From afar, the tall hotel tower was already visible. Tonight's charity gala was being held there. The entrance was ablaze with lights, a long red carpet stretching out front. Guests came and went in glamorous attire, poised and elegant. Holding Henry and Lily's hands, I took a deep breath, steadier than ever. A few years ago, I had been the wife forced to swallow humiliation under a fake divorce agreement. But tonight, I was Claire, a businesswoman who had built everything with her own hands. The hotel ballroom buzzed with voices, lights glittered across crystal champagne towers, and waiters moved gracefully through the crowd with trays in hand. Countless familiar and unfamiliar gazes turned toward me, not with scorn or doubt anymore, but with respect and curiosity. "She's Miss Claire, isn't she? The one who runs the training school. Didn't I hear she has over 1,000 students now and even runs 3 branch campuses?" The whispers spread, but I kept my expression calm, my steps steady. The host took the stage and announced the start of the donation segment. Some gave money, some donated goods, and applause rose again and again. When my name was called, a fresh wave of murmurs broke out in the audience. I led Lily up onto the stage, while Henry sat straight-backed below, his eyes full of pride. The stage lights flared, and the spotlight fell on me and my daughter. Lily piped up in her tender voice, "Mommy is the prettiest." The hall erupted into laughter and applause, the atmosphere lively and warm. I took the microphone, speaking calmly but with strength. A few years ago, I was raising 2 children on my own. Back then, I had almost nothing. Many people thought I wouldn't last long. But today, I want to tell you all, failure in marriage is not the end. Independence and hard work are a woman's greatest strength. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Some people's eyes brimmed with tears, others nodded again and again. As I scanned the crowd, I saw my mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhao, tears shimmering in her eyes, yet her face glowing with relief. In the corner, my parents sat hand in hand, their faces full of pride. And not far away in the hall, Ethan stood quietly, his gaze steady and unwavering, fixed solely on me. He didn't step forward or interrupt. Instead, with one gentle look, he told me, "I'm here. Go ahead and shine." After the donation ceremony ended, people came over to greet me. Veterans of the business world politely praised, "Miss Claire, so young and accomplished, you're bound for a bright future." I smiled in response, but deep inside I knew clearly that none of these honors or empty titles could ever be as precious as my children's smiles. During a break, I returned to my seat. Henry held my hand tightly and whispered, "Mom, you're the best." My eyes grew hot with emotion in that instant. As the evening drew to a close, a sudden stir rippled through the hall, drawing everyone's attention. "Isn't that Jacob?" someone whispered. "How does he even have the face to show up here?" I turned to look and indeed saw a worn, haggard figure. He was no longer the confident officer of the past. His eyes were dull, and he stood alone, without anyone by his side. He looked toward me, his lips trembling, but not a single word came out. In the crowd, some people sneered and pointed. His face went pale, as though he had just been slapped hard. I gave him only a brief glance before turning my eyes away. My heart felt no ripple. No hatred, no pity. In that moment, I finally understood that true release doesn't come when the other person kneels and begs for forgiveness, but when I no longer care at all. The final light show of the gala began, brilliant beams weaving through the hall. The host invited all guests onto the stage for a group photo. Holding Lily in my arms and Henry's hand in mine, I stood at the very center of the stage. The spotlight shone down on us once more, thunderous applause filling the hall. My children's smiles were radiant. Ethan stood in the crowd watching me, his gaze steady and tender. That moment, I straightened my back, and in my heart there was only one voice. In this life, I live brilliantly, freely, and without regret. As I stepped down from the stage, Henry squeezed my hand in excitement. "Mom, one day I'll be like you, so that everyone will applaud for me too." I smiled and nodded. "Yes, you both will be even better than Mom." The night wind brushed my face as I stepped out of the hotel, gazing up at the deep, starry sky. Memories of divorce, cold stares, gossip, and tears flashed through my mind like fragments of an old dream. But all of it had turned into the strength that let me stand tall today. The road ahead was still long, but I was already walking firmly on the path that belonged to me.